In a world where female voices are easily silenced, a brilliant analyst faces the theft of her groundbreaking work by a powerful executive. When signs of financial collapse are ignored, fate weaves an unexpected tapestry of justice. A story about staying true to the truth when no one is watching, and the silent power of patience. Catherine Moore watched from the window of her small apartment in Brooklyn as the rain washed over the sidewalks on an autumn morning. The gray sky reflected her mood as she prepared for another day at Meridian Capital. At 32 years old, she had achieved everything that conventional success standards demanded. An MBA from Princeton, where her thesis on predictive risk modeling was hailed as visionary, a job at one of the leading financial institutions, and enough financial stability to live alone in New York. But there, facing her reflection in the glass while adjusting the pearl necklace that had belonged to her grandmother, Catherine recognized the growing emptiness in her chest. 7 years at Meridian had gradually worn down her initial enthusiasm. With every overlooked meeting, every idea dismissed without consideration, every condescending dear, something inside her diminished. "You're too good for that place," her mother Eleanor said during their weekly Sunday calls. Eleanor Moore, a retired math teacher, had raised Catherine alone after her father died when she was only 8 years old. "It's not that simple, Mom," Catherine always replied, meticulously organizing her documents in the brown leather folder, a graduation gift. "I need to pay my bills, and besides, the work itself still fascinates me." This was true. Over the past 18 months, isolated in her windowless cubicle on the 43rd floor, squeezed between the dead file room and the printer room, Catherine had created something extraordinary. An algorithm capable of identifying collapses in derivatives weeks before they happened, with 93% accuracy on historical data. It was the kind of innovation that could transform risk management in the financial sector. The clock read 6:47. She finished her coffee, grabbed her umbrella, and headed out to face another day of invisibility. Elsewhere in the city, James Walsh adjusted his navy blue Hermes tie as his private driver navigated through the morning traffic. At 47 years old, the senior trader at Meridian Capital embodied Wall Street success, impeccably cut gray hair, a tailored suit, and a penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park. 2 decades of manipulating numbers and people had earned him power, prestige, and considerable wealth. Meeting at 9 with the German investors, then lunch with the compensation committee, his assistant reminded him over the car phone. "Perfect," James replied, hanging up without another word. As the car moved along, he mentally reviewed his presentation. He needed something new, something impressive to secure his annual bonus. Last quarter's numbers hadn't been exceptional, and the pressure from new tech players was rapidly changing the game. James smiled as he remembered the team meeting the previous week. That quiet analyst, Catherine or Caroline, something like that, had presented an interesting methodology on risk forecasting. He had interrupted her, of course. He couldn't allow a junior analyst to steal the spotlight. But there was something in her charts that could be useful with the right adjustments. "Stop at the corner Starbucks," he ordered the driver. "I need my coffee." The conference room's light board displayed the second slide of Catherine's presentation. She had spent weeks refining every detail, ensuring that even executives without a technical background could understand the power of her algorithm. As you can see in this chart, when we apply the model to the historical data from 2008, it would have signaled the collapse of mortgage derivatives approximately 3 weeks before the first market signs, giving enough time to "Leave this to the adults, darling. Get back to your spreadsheets." James Walsh's voice sliced through the room like a razor. A momentary silence followed, soon broken by stifled laughter. The executives' glances alternated between pity and amusement. Catherine felt the heat rising from her neck to her cheeks. "But the model clearly shows that," she tried to continue. "Catherine," James pronounced her name as if it were an indulgence. "We appreciate your enthusiasm, but these decisions involve billions of dollars and decades of experience. Shall we move on to the next item?" Catherine watched as her months of work were dismissed in seconds. She carefully closed her laptop, gathered her notes, and left the room in silence, humiliation burning in her stomach like acid. In the bathroom, locked in a stall, she allowed herself 3 minutes, timed on the clock, to take deep breaths and regain composure. She would not cry at work. She would not give anyone that satisfaction. 3 days later, Catherine was browsing the company's intranet when she noticed an announcement. "Walsh presents innovative risk management methodology to investors." Clicking the link, she felt her heart race. there were her graphs. Her algorithms, her conclusions, word for word, but under the name of James Walsh. The copying was so blatant that not even the technical terms she had specifically created for her model were altered. Catherine's stomach sank when she read the news that James had received an advance bonus of $2 million for his revolutionary contribution. That same afternoon, she received an automated email. Congratulations to the team for the recognition of the new risk management methodology. The email had been sent to the entire department. Catherine printed everything, her original documents with timestamps, the material presented by James, relevant emails, and stored them in a folder. She considered scheduling a meeting with human resources but quickly dismissed the idea. She had seen what had happened to Melissa from the legal department when she complained about a director's behavior. 2 months later, Melissa had been restructured out of the company. That night, alone in her Brooklyn apartment, Catherine stared at the ceiling for hours. The rain hit the window in an irregular rhythm that seemed to mock her powerlessness. The feeling of injustice grew inside her like a storm. Finally, something unexpected happened. Catherine knelt for the first time in years. The prayers from her childhood, taught by her grandmother, came to mind with surprising ease. God, she whispered, I'm tired of being invisible. If the truth still matters, show me that justice exists. Tears came then, uncontrolled. She cried for her shattered hopes, for her stalled career, for her silenced voice. She cried until, exhausted, she fell asleep right there on the living room floor. Months passed in a blur of routines. Catherine continued refining her model, now away from curious eyes. In June, the algorithm detected instabilities in a specific class of derivatives. She meticulously documented the signals and sent a preliminary report to James, who responded with a brief "received." In September, the alerts became critical. The model showed alarming patterns almost identical to those that preceded previous collapses. Catherine prepared a formal report. Imminent systemic risk requires urgent action, and sent it not only to James but also to the compliance director with all the necessary technical data. 2 days later, she received James's response with a copy to the director. Unnecessary alarmism. Situation under control. The director never replied. Catherine felt torn between despair and resolve. She continued monitoring the data, documenting every alert signal, filing every communication. Something told her this story was not yet over. 6 weeks later, the storm hit. What began as a small tremor in a specific class of derivatives quickly turned into a tsunami. In 72 hours, $200 million evaporated from Meridian Capital's accounts. The board of directors called for an emergency audit. For 5 tense days, external investigators scoured servers, retrieved deleted emails, and interviewed key employees. Catherine was summoned 3 times to explain her model and the alerts she had issued. By Friday, the report was ready, 230 pages with timestamps, metadata, and full evidence of gross negligence and misappropriation of intellectual property. Catherine received a call from the compliance director on Sunday night. Miss Moore, your presence is required tomorrow at the general shareholders meeting, as a technical witness. She hardly slept that night, oscillating between anxiety about what might happen and a strange feeling that something important was about to change. Monday, 9 in the morning. The large auditorium of Meridian Capital was packed with approximately 400 shareholders. The atmosphere was tense, nervous murmurs filled the air while senior executives occupied the front row with grave expressions on their faces. Catherine sat in the 3rd row wearing a simple navy blue suit and her grandmother's pearls. She noticed James Walsh across the aisle, accompanied by 2 serious-looking men whom she assumed were lawyers. The chairman of the board opened the session with a brief statement on transparency and corporate accountability before handing over to the compliance officer, who took the stage with a thick folder. Good morning. As everyone knows, Meridian has suffered significant losses in the last month. Our investigation identified serious flaws in our risk management processes and ethical issues that need to be addressed. The room was in absolute silence as the director continued. In September this year, analyst Catherine Moore formally warned of an imminent collapse in the exact sector that later generated our losses. This warning was filed by Mr. James Walsh as unnecessary alarmism without any further investigation. Murmurs filled the room. The director raised his hand for silence. Additionally, our investigation revealed that the methodology by which Mr. Walsh received recognition and financial compensation of $2 million in March was extracted, without authorization or attribution, from Miss Moore's original work. The giant screen behind him lit up, projecting emails side by side. Catherine's digital signature, James asking subordinates for some tweaks to Catherine's code, paragraphs copied in full, altered metadata. Catherine saw James turn pale. He tried to stand up, but one of his lawyers grabbed his arm, speaking urgently in his ear. "Miss Moore," called the compliance director, "could you come to the stage, please?" Catherine felt as if she were in a dream as she walked down the central aisle. Hundreds of eyes followed her. She climbed the steps with trembling legs. The microphone seemed to weigh tons in her hands. "Would your model have prevented the losses we suffered?" asked the chairman of the board, stepping closer. Catherine took a deep breath. "Yes, completely. The signals were clear 6 weeks before the collapse, with patterns almost identical to the historical events that my algorithm was trained to identify." An elderly shareholder shouted from the back. "Why didn't you insist more when you were ignored?" Catherine felt tears pressing, but something in her had changed since that night kneeling in her apartment. "Because I spent so much time trying to be heard that I forgot something important. The truth doesn't need to shout, it just needs to wait for its moment." The silence that followed carried the weight of respect. The chairman of the board stepped forward again. "Meridian Capital failed you, Mrs. Moore. We want to start making amends by offering you the position of Director of Risk Management, reporting directly to the board, with appropriate compensation, of course." Catherine looked at her hands. Director. It was all she had dreamed of for years, but something had changed in those months of silence and waiting. She didn't want to accept to prove something to James or anyone else, but because she felt it was where she was meant to be. "Can I have until tomorrow to think?" she asked. The president blinked, visibly surprised. Of course, understandable. That night, Catherine talked with her mother for an hour, sharing every detail of the surreal day. "What do you really want, dear?" Eleanor asked. "To make a difference. To build something that matters, maybe change the culture of that place." After the call, Catherine found her grandmother's old Bible on the shelf. The yellowed pages brought comfort as she flipped through them, occasionally stopping to read passages underlined by her grandmother's wrinkled hand. She fell asleep with the book open on her chest. The next morning, she called the chairman of the board. "I accept the position, but with one condition. I want to implement a mandatory mentorship program for leadership, focused especially on junior analysts. If we are truly going to change Meridian's culture, it starts with those who have power." There was a pause on the other end of the line, followed by an appreciative laugh. "You already think like a director, Mrs. Moore. Condition accepted. Welcome to the executive team." James Walsh was escorted out of the building on Wednesday, carrying a cardboard box with his personal belongings. 3 weeks later, Catherine learned that he was facing multiple lawsuits, both from the company and from individual shareholders. Surprisingly, she felt no joy in his downfall, only a deep sadness for someone who chose shortcuts instead of solid foundations. On the following Sunday, Catherine visited a small church in Brooklyn, something she hadn't done in years. The pastor, a man with white hair and a gentle smile, preached about a verse from Proverbs, "Whoever digs a pit will fall into it." Catherine smiled, not out of any sense of satisfied revenge, but because she had learned something precious. When you build with truth, even in silence, even in pain, the foundation remains. And when storms come, only what has been built with integrity remains standing. In her new office on the 50th floor, overlooking the city skyline, Catherine placed a small plaque with the words she had spoken on that stage. "The truth doesn't need to shout, it just needs to wait." In her first month as director, she hired 5 new analysts, all talented women with innovative ideas. The mentorship program was thriving, with senior executives learning to listen to voices that were previously ignored. Catherine realized that God hadn't answered her prayer with a thunderclap, but with something more subtle and powerful. He had moved the right pieces at the right time through ordinary processes, an audit, time-stamped emails, a board willing to listen, with the precision of someone who sees the whole board. And she, finally, was no longer invisible. She was exactly where she had always been meant to be, not because she fought desperately to be seen, but because she remained faithful when no one was watching. Sometimes, Catherine reflected as she watched the sunset over the city, the greatest victory is not proving that you were right. It's staying true while waiting for the truth to prove itself.